Welcome to the Victoria Rumble Room, a little show that originates in Victoria, British Columbia, but strives to do all sorts of things across Canada and the wide, wide world. And I'm Robin Adair, and with me, as always, my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation himself, John Jurisic. And Johnny, we've reached a milestone. We're over 700,000 views since we started this little project about a year and a half ago.
We started this project, Robin, because we like doing this. You and I both like chatting with people. Some people play golf, some people blah. We like to chat about issues with our community. 700,000 views later, so do a few others, it appears. And we get our views from all across the social media landscape: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. You know, we don't kid around. That equates to almost 50,000 people watching our interviews per month. Not bad for a little hobby, the Victoria Rumble Room. We so much appreciate people coming on board.
We really do, John. And, you know, we've been hearing a lot of opinions. A lot of people are now writing the show to tell us what they think about some of our different installments. For example, we've had people pushing back quite a bit on our coverage of the war in Ukraine, some saying stick to Canadian issues. And one writer doesn't care about Ukraine, but he really likes prairie populism. Larry writes, other than her stance backing that clown Zelensky, the Premier of Alberta is a breath of fresh air.
I suspect if we're getting around 700,000 views, we're going to get a lot more comments, and boy, do we appreciate them. For example, Peter also doesn't have good things to say about Ukraine and isn't happy to see our tax money going in that direction. He writes the following: I think Trudeau and Freeland and the rest of this government has bankrupted Canada for Ukraine. This government is hired to serve Canada and its people. This government is destroying our economy, closing business, and trampling on our Charter of Rights. I'm damn proud of what Alberta Premier Smith is doing. Now, the rest of Canada needs to grow, prepare for this, I might be saying an inappropriate word, needs to grow some balls and say enough is enough. Remove these criminals from our government.
And finally, Timothy writes us, Ukraine has had winter conditions since the end of the Ice Age. I don't see how conflating winter conditions with Napoleon's or Hitler's wars makes your headline anything other than clickbait. Sad days in journalism when you have to stoop to high school level publication standards. Well, I appreciate that he at least acknowledges we have standards on this show, John.
Yes.
and we do welcome comments, sharing ideas and opinions, I believe, is what makes Canada a great democracy and makes us a great people. So keep coming with those comments. And John, let's now shift over and talk about our new Premier, our beloved new Premier, David Eby.
Robin, hasn't he started his reign as Premier with a bang? Oh, lordy, like an announcement every a couple of minutes. He's unveiled a new housing strategy, which will immediately force strata buildings to allow renters. And he's unveiled a new action plan to stop street crime. Wonderful. And crack down on chronic offenders.
Around making sure that our communities are safe for everybody. Safe for the people struggling with mental health and addiction in our streets. Safe for families, safe for seniors, safe for all British Columbians. This action plan has two key tracks. One around enforcement, recognizing that we have zero tolerance for violence in our communities, making sure that people are protected. The second track around intervening, helping people break the cycle of life in and out of jail, preventing crime before it happens.
We've been calling on the government to stop the catch and release of dangerous criminals and get them off our streets, haven't we, for months, if not longer. Let's see if this new approach makes any difference. Our Premier, Robin, has certainly been busy.
He's definitely, he said 100 days. He says 100 days, some major things are going to happen. And I love how, included in this is we're going to finally get something done about housing, a new standalone housing ministry. And it's interesting, he's been the housing minister for the last 5 years. So, I guess we're going to see some changes, though. And I'm willing to sort of sit back and see what he can do. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and see what he can do. Regarding housing, he's made the following announcements: an end to restrictions for those seeking to live in rental properties, an end to ban on renters in condominiums with strata boards. Means that renters, for the first time in a long time, will be able to get into any condo in the province. And I think that's going to be a big change. New legislation to force municipal governments to meet provincial targets to increase housing stock.
That last one. Will there be a civil war in British Columbia over municipalities fighting that last edict from Premier Eby? Here to talk about this legislation and the shifting ground of construction and development is Mike Kozakowski of Citified Media, which provides, amongst other things, research for housing projects and commercial space. Let's zoom him in. Now joining us in the extraordinary Victoria Rumble Room is Mike Kozakowski. And Michael, there's so much to talk about in the housing sector. It's really the center of the economy, isn't it? Let's start with Premier David Eby's new legislation designed to solve the housing crisis. Okay, It only took 5 years, but anyway, this includes ending the rental ban on strata housing and new provincial powers to push civic governments to approve housing at a quicker pace. See how that goes. What are you hearing, Michael, in the development community? Will these measures make any impact? Will they fix the problem?
You've got all these pressures and all these solutions and all these problems, and they all revolve around one thing, and that's government. All the layers, all hands on deck from every layer of government. But I think that, what the nice thing is that over the last several years, at least the municipal governments have begun to understand their role in some of the problems that we're facing. And it's certainly not a new issue. I mean, we were screaming from the rafters 20 years ago that once the baby boomers start to retire, and once these various pressures start to materialize that we've only hypothesized over so many years, we're going to be unprepared to deal with them. And that's where we are. We are now unprepared to deal with what it means for a community like Victoria when virtually every piece of real estate can be outbid by someone coming from somewhere else who has more money and more disposable income and certainly more room to reach financially than your average worker in this community. And it's not like we weren't prepared for it. We knew, or I should say, well, being prepared and knowing it would happen are two different things, but it's not like we were caught off guard. We saw this train coming down the tracks 20 years ago. So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
And, Mike, it's great to have you on the show and great to get your perspective on all of this. It seems to me we're already hearing rumblings there will be some pushback from some municipalities to this legislation. In fact, we just had elections in places like Colwood and Langford. They removed their mayors and they removed councils entirely in Langford because they wanted to go to a slow development to non-development style of council. And Langford's been growing, faster than any other municipality, certainly in our region. And there have been other municipalities across the province who've done the same thing, looking for how can we slow things down? How can we add value to our community and not build too rapidly and lose all the things that we appreciate? So, what are your feelings about that? This was all with the intention of seeing things slow in terms of building. Are you anticipating we're going to see a real slowdown now when we've got the province on one side saying build, and we got some municipalities on the other side saying, whoa, slow down?
In terms of Langford, there's been so much inventory that was approved over the last 4 years in the run-up to this election, knowing from early on that the Mayor Stu Young may or may not run. So there was a lot of pressure on that city hall to pump through a lot of inventory. So we're not going to see an immediate change, but in the years to come, like 3 or 4 years out, I think I think if the current council is not as receptive to new housing as the previous one was, then we're going to start seeing those impacts. But they'll be felt years into the future, like 6 or 7 or more years into the future. We all know the timelines, right? You approve something, takes a year to approve it. In Langford, maybe a little bit less, several years to build it, and then the impact is felt. I think it's tricky, and Minister Eby is certainly not holding back. He promised to cause some waves, and he's doing it. And we're going to see how things pan out. But man, there's so many balls being juggled right now. it's just tough. It's tough to put your finger on what the outcomes will be.
So, Mike, I had asked you a question earlier, and I said it was my last question. Guess what? I lied. I would love to know what the development community is thinking about the political impact of this election. I think we kind of alluded to that earlier, but I really want to dig a little deeper. The West Shore, as far as I can interpret, is kind of closed. Okay, let's not pretend that didn't happen. That means there's got to be pressure elsewhere. Peninsula, especially North Saanich, is kind of still closed. All right. So where are folks going to go? Where are these folks going? Just higher in Victoria? It's up.
Yeah, it's going to be a big push for densification, and that in itself is tricky because densification. There's huge benefits to it. I'm a big proponent of it myself, but I've chosen to move out of downtown Victoria, and I live very far from downtown Victoria now because the densification where I lived got to a point where there were some challenges as a result of that. But I openly, and my eyes were wide open when I chose to live where I did. But over time, my opinions changed. And what I hear from people is that there is a concern that with these provincial measures coming into place, these density targets that the minister or premier, I think I called him Minister Eby before as well, but it's Premier Eby now. I'm still trying to get adjusted to that.
Yeah, that's fine, and no problem.
There's concerns from people that have invested relatively big dollars and lots of time into relatively low density communities, and there are benefits to those low density communities. That's why single family dwelling neighborhoods remain the most popular and the most sought after in the market. And those changes are going to potentially come fast. It's neighborhoods that weren't expecting those changes to materialize.
If these collective measures don't end up working, okay, what would be your suggested solutions to fix this housing stock shortage?
Certainly, this is not. It's not like this is an insurmountable problem. One of the issues with affordability, in my opinion, we've chatted about this on your show before, is the availability of developable land. And with the restrictions that we have on the South Island where you can develop, I mean, that goes right back into the cost of developing. So, for example, right now, the cheapest lot you can build on in Greater Victoria is going to cost you around $400,000, probably closer to $450,000. That's just the property. That's just the lot, and it's a small lot. Add another 300 or so thousand just for materials to build a relatively small house. Add another 300,000 plus for labor. So you're at $1 million, and that's if everything goes according to plan and it's picture perfect, which doesn't always happen. If it costs you $1 million to build just a standard house in a far suburb of Greater Victoria, I mean, what? I mean,
there's some problems. There's a
problem.
Great to hear from Mike Kozakowski and get his take on our ongoing housing issues. Thank you, Mike. By the way, we're excited, amongst other things, amongst all the things that are going on, to be speaking to the new mayor of Victoria next week. Marianne Alto will be in the Rumble Room.
And we have so much to talk to Mayor Alto about. For example, what's her reaction to David Eby and this cleaning up of crime? Could this make a difference to street crime in Victoria and to the tent cities, the expanding tent cities? I mean, they've spent so much money on housing. The provincial government under John Horgan spent millions for new housing. Yet the tents are still there. And I'll be interested to hear what she has to say about that. And we got to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's only been the mayor for a very short time, but I do like the tone she's taking about slowing down a bit, taking a look, evaluating. It's time that we really did that in this community. And I wouldn't mind seeing that kind of thing applied to issues from the past where we moved so rapidly and it's seen with very little consultation. For example, the removal of the statue of Sir John A MacDonald, Canada's first prime minister, which was dragged away unceremoniously from City Hall and never to be seen again. And, I think maybe there could have been a label on display explaining why there were problems with what the prime minister at that time did. He was the prime minister in the late 1880s and 1890s. They brought in, amongst other things, the Indian Act, the setting up of reserves across the country, Indian schools. And there are certainly many questions today about the wisdom of that. I'm all for debate, but you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Was Sir John A. MacDonald a perfect guy? No, but he was somebody who helped build this country, got the railway across Canada. We're not Americans today, in my opinion, because of Sir John A. MacDonald. And I think a statue can stand for a lot of things, and perhaps that can be reevaluated at some point in Victoria. Perhaps the First Nations can get involved in doing just that. And at the moment, the statue is in a storage warehouse in Richmond. The MacDonald Society has it once again. And joining us now to talk more about Sir John A. from that society, the MacDonald Society, is a member and also a King's Counsel from Victoria, Chris Considine. Let's zoom him in. And now joining us in the Victoria Rumble Room for the first time is Christopher Considine, K.C., that's King's Counsel. You must be having some challenges remembering that.
It's been a change, obviously, Robin and John, and a pleasure, by the way, to be with you on your show.
So the reason you're here, there's so many great questions we could be asking on so many different topics, but the topic that has really caught our imagination is the removal of Sir John A. MacDonald 4 years ago, and now the return of Sir John A. MacDonald's statue to the MacDonald Society, of which you are a member. So I guess my first question is, here's the guy that founder of the country, or one of the founding fathers of the country, but also a founder of residential schools and somebody who was there when the Indian Act was created. What's your take on all this historical reassessment we're going through?
I think that we become more aware first of all, I should say that Sir John was an amazing guy. He created this country. He created in a very short period of time. It became and is one of the largest countries in the world, and he drove a railway across this country in a period of about 20 years, which is remarkable for any public works endeavor in Canada. Think how long it took to build a bridge in Victoria. So, but what I think is that we've become more aware as a society as to the goods and the bads of what occurred in the past in the 19th century, especially with respect to the Indigenous peoples in Canada. And that's why we see some reappraisal. And the very important thing is not to lose sight of the past and balance it. So if we wipe out all memorials, we wipe out the history, then we're bound to repeat those mistakes from the past. So we have to find the balance. And I think that's what's been taking place and we're evolving towards, perhaps, as a society.
Chris, you've presented cases to the Supreme Court of Canada. You know the law as well as anyone that I know, as well as any lawyer in Canada. The City of Victoria recently issued a list of demands before releasing the statue. And those demands include consulting the city and local First Nations before doing anything with the statue in the future, on the future of Vancouver Island. Do you believe these demands have legal teeth, or is it really more political posturing or a political wish list?
I think it's more a matter of building a consensus. So let me just give you the history of this. The statue was removed without any real consultation with the Sir John A MacDonald Society, which donated the statue to Victoria to commemorate Sir John as a Canadian Prime Minister, having occupied the seat here as a member of Parliament for 4 years. And that was 50 years ago. At that time, we didn't know about Indigenous matters. The city then removed the statue at incredibly short notice without real consultation with us or really anybody else in the city very much except for the city family. That was a past. Then it became apparent that we had a greater awareness, and I say that not only as society, but people as a whole in Canada, of some of the tragedies that occurred in the Indigenous communities as a result of the discovery of the graves at Kamloops. So at that point, we as a society realized that putting the statue back was not going to happen. There had been discussions prior to the discovery of the graves with the city and the city family here and with us to put up the statue, put up a sign which would indicate the goods and the bads of Sir John, and also to balance that off with an Indigenous sculpture of some sort and a plaque, again, commemorating the Indigenous activities here in the island. That was a very balanced approach. But I think that the discovery of the graves at Kamloops tipped it over the edge, which people said right now, statues are not appropriate, which commemorate a period of time which brought a lot of sadness for a lot of people. So we made the initiative to approach the city and say, look, if you're not going to put up the statue now, let us have the statue back. And in the spirit of trying to heal and bring a sense of rehabilitation to what's taken place in the past, we're quite happy to agree to consensus build. And that's been what was the driving force behind those conditions.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the relationship between MacDonald and the First Nations. My understanding is he actually was going to give people from the First Nations the vote. He was going to give them the vote, and it was actually Laurier who took it away later on. So to paint it as a black brush that he was out to get the First Nations maybe isn't very fair. What would you say about that in terms of historical remembrance? I mean, are we conveniently forgetting the good things and maybe overplaying some of the things that were just the way people thought about the world at the time, back in the 1800s?
I think we're seeing the classic pendulum swing, which is that Sir John was regarded as a great patriot of this country. And then the residential school issues have become more apparent. And so he's been painted with a black brush. But he did give the vote to the Indigenous peoples in this country with certain conditions. And the Laurier government subsequently, or whichever government it was, subsequently came in the 1890s and changed that. I'm hopeful, and certainly from the discussions that I'd had with the city and the city had had with the first families or first family here in this city, is that we will get there and that we will balance the memories of Sir John with residential schools and remember what Sir John did in this country. He created this country. He saved us from being annexed by the Americans. He forged an amazing place. When I travel, Robin and John, and I travel as a lawyer sometimes, and I travel as a Canadian, and I travel as a diplomat. And I can tell you, no matter where I go in this world, whether it be developing countries or countries in Europe, I am told that Canada is regarded as the best country in the world to live because of its sense of democracy and a sense of great governance. And that, in large part, was founded by Sir John.
So I guess as a lawyer, I still want to ask this question as well. We see all these statues being defaced. We see red paint on Queen Victoria. We see the Queen Victoria in Winnipeg knocked down and beheaded. We see Queen Elizabeth beheaded at Beacon Hill Park. See Captain James Cook torn down in the Inner Harbor, and now, of course, Sir John A removed in Kingston and Victoria. So the people that are doing this, maybe they're doing it in the name of the First Nations, but I don't see a lot of First Nations people actually participating for the most part. There are some, but it seems to me it's people who think this is what the First Nations would want. This is what we should be doing on behalf of the First Nations. What do you think the First Nations leadership themselves would like in the long term? And is it something your society can work with them?
Absolutely. We're very, very happy to work with the First Nations people and build consensus. And that's been a mandate from the society over the current discussions with respect to Sir John's statue being returned. We have always found, and I have always found personally, that dialogue and listening with the First Nations is extremely important, and the society is quite prepared to do that.
Our thanks to Chris Considine. And on a happy note, John, perhaps once again, you can quickly explain how people can follow the Rumble Room, like the Rumble Room, write us notes, all that good, fun stuff that makes this such a vital show.
I certainly will, Robin. And thank you to the over 700,000 people that have already accessed all of these assets that include our core information sources, our Facebook page, get a lot of action on our Twitter page. All of our interviews are housed on our YouTube page. You can see the addresses above me. We also have a news and views group on Facebook. I always get that wrong. And that's where you can post your viewpoints. You can post events, whatever you like. We also have an Instagram page and a TikTok page, Robin. So we are right with the times. Okay. So with all of that said, with 700,000 plus views later, I remain your humble servant, the Croatian sensation. By the way, my team tied 0-0 with Morocco today. Anyway, who's cheering on Croatia? We are cheering, and Canada at the World Cup. Johnny Jurisic.
And I'm Robin Adair, and I'm cheering on Canada. Always cheering on Canada. And rumble on.